China that once you get over about $12,000 a year, child labor essentially disappears, regardless of the laws. And the laws didn't work in the US. They didn't affect high school rates. They didn't affect child labor rates, any of those things. Like whether or not they existed had almost no statistically significant effect. And so
Pick one. After the Supreme Court unanimously ruled against them in 2021, the NCAA has finally allowed student athletes to profit off of their talents. They may now enter into so called name, image, likeness contracts. Uh, this pertains to college athletes mostly, but in some jurisdictions, high school athletes are included. However, as it stands, there is very little regulation in place. There are contracts being made with children that include extremely shady provisions. Should high schoolers be allowed to enter into these contracts? It seems like this market would be rife for exploitation, so shouldn't we have special protections for children as we do in other areas? Would regulation solve this? Or should we allow them all the ability to try to maximize their profits? Okay, yeah. So I actually hadn't heard of the NCAA reverse quiz. I don't know how I missed that case, right? But like, yeah, they lost. Fantastic. Fuck you, NCAA, for which they had in place, and people can make money off of do promotional deals, basically, right? But now we're seeing these things with high schoolers, and like the constructs we're describing in the article are just like absolutely freaking wild, absolutely wild. Um, and it seems like, well, we should just have a level of consumer protection, at least I feel. So I wanted to see what you all have to say. Let's start with our friend Lactoid.
Yeah. So as it regards adult college students, I think it's perfectly fine that the athletes are allowed to profit in a more direct way. If you've ever been on a campus, you know that college athletes profit in many other ways, including opportunities for advancement and many on-campus perks. But this is a new way to profit, and it's totally fine. It should not be enforced by law, but they are adults, and if they make money off of it, that should be allowed. When it comes to high schoolers, I agree it's a lot more difficult and it's more of a gray area. I think that there likely should be restrictions on what sports that high schoolers should play, and minors should not be exposed to dangerous conditions. But as long as what they're doing is reasonably safe, there's nothing wrong with the high schooler making some money off of it, right? So high schoolers work at jobs, and we all agree that it's totally fine. If the alternative here is that high schoolers would just do the exact same thing but not make any money off of it, I think this would just obviously be worse for them. Child labor is not intrinsically wrong. It can actually be very good just as long as the children are not tasked with particularly dangerous tasks.
Scott.
yeah, so I agree with pretty much everything Lactoid said. I'm actually really happy that he's here tonight because this this question kind of sneaks in a premise of a lack of understanding of contract law. Because every single case that I saw, I feel like a good defense attorney could void those contracts and potentially get damages, either with an unconscionable defense or an undue influence defense. Like when we're looking at the last case where the individual was separated from their parents, brought out to California, sleeping on the guy's couch, like, and being basically defrauded about the promises that were given, I think that is a very like open and shut undue influence case. And common law and contract law already covers these things. Yes, it's going to take the court some time to like set precedent that's like kind of specific to name, image, likeness contracts with minors and with college students in sports and like kind of like work out those kinks. But the idea that we need additional regulation is just people seeing a problem and being like, the government needs to step in and fix this. But like the government already has a process to fix this, which is the judicial system, right? Like it's a violation of state statute. What is it from since 1954? But really, the precedent is set in 65 with a really famous case that I think most people that have gone to law school and had any class on like contract law will remember, which is Williams v. Walker Thomas Furniture Company, right? And this case is really talking about, from 57 to 62, someone had them on like a payment plan for furniture, and they stopped making their payments in 62 5 years later, and they repossessed literally everything that they had ever bought, despite most things already being paid off, because the contract stipulated that they lose everything, all of their property, even though they've paid off most of their property, in the event that they kind of like no longer am able to make payments. And so the DC appellate court sends it back and says, hey, can a contract be unconscionable? We need to test this for conscionability. And so, and there's a lot of other case law that goes around this. I'd love to talk about it more. But ultimately, the idea that we need the government to step in is really just a question on like not understanding that the best way to handle this is through the courts and setting precedent from a common law perspective on like how these contracts should be enforced and what is and isn't a valid contract.
All right, please.
Yeah, so I'm not much of a sports fan here, but the whole NBA being able to do this has been a conversation for the last 20 years. So congratulations that they got that one through. I don't think it'll actually be that harmful, but when we talk about minors, I'm a little lost in that one, particularly in the fact that the last I checked, for most legally binding contracts, minors aren't considered to be legally authorized actors, that they're actually dependents and largely legally incompetent. To the point where you're not allowed to be entered into a contract. So either you've got parents signing off on this, or there's some kind of legalism that I'm completely missing. So I'll happily engage with that in the open.
I think you're
muted, Prime.
Sorry, excuse me. I had to mute for background noise. Aiko, please.
Yeah, okay, so when I think about this topic, I think about the way that this has progressed. So it first started with the Olympics when they decided that you didn't have to be amateur to be in the Olympics. Then they started asking questions about fairness when it came to the NCAA. Now, if the question's going to high school, I think we're dealing with a sort of a situation that's very different from those other two. And that is this. So if you look at what prompted the NCAA to go in this direction, it was because the schools themselves were being perceived as exploiting the students that were working for them. They were making a ton of money off of them. They were using them to promote things. These athletes were little celebrities on their own, but then they weren't allowed to have any of the upsides of that status, and that was struck people as mostly unfair. And many of these colleges that were doing this were private colleges who were using that income that came from these contracts like to benefit themselves, whatever. But at the high school level, it's not public schools that are doing this. It's almost entirely, I'm sorry, it's not private schools that are doing this. It's almost entirely public schools. And so you don't have that sort of same dynamic of a private college sort of taking advantage of you or exploiting you in that way or using you as a celebrity. So I think that that's one thing that makes it fundamentally different. And I think in instances where that is happening, then we might want to look at whether or not we allow schools to get, to do this. And to Scott's point, yeah, you could say that, asking the government to solve the problem is stepping in. But at the same time, I would say in this case, government is the problem because these are all public schools that are doing this. If this exploitation is happening, it's exploitation by the government of students that are going to their schools. And so, yeah, I mean, I think something has to be done about it. But in this case, I think it's limiting government, not limiting private schools per se.
Roy.
Yeah, so it might be a little bit of a good thing that Doobie's not here because I might be doing some fence sitting, my usual fence sitting. But what I think is a step in the right direction, not going to solve everything, but my original position of banning football would be a great step in the right direction. But like Tiberius, I'm not much of a sports person. I think most competitive sports are pretty dumb, but I do follow real sports, specifically esports. And this reminds me of esports, where, yeah, so the scene has matured a little bit more, but still not perfect. But this reminds you of early days of esports where you had really young people getting into contracts that they didn't really know the implications of. Where it's yeah, we'll provide you with whatever team host, but then we'll take 100% of your winnings. and there goes all your like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so I'm not sure exactly what this. So to answer the question of should high schoolers be allowed to enter these contracts, my intuition says probably not, given the fact that they probably can't understand the implications. But I'm open to like learning and being wrong. But yeah, I'm all in favor generally of consumer protection and like whatever sort of minimizes people being exploited, either through less regulation or more. That's the direction that I want to go in. But I guess I'll be mostly learning, trying to understand during the open.
Corey being a watcher again.
I'm a voyeur. You can put that label on me.
Al, please.
I believe that children are too young to consent to many a thing. And they're too young to consent to legal contracts. They're too young to consent to sex and things of that nature. So I think that the only way they should be able to have these contracts for their image licensing out of high school should be like through their legal guardian, maybe their parents. But for people who are like 18 and older, like in college, I think they should be able to just go free and do what they need to do. Maybe they should ask a lawyer to sign, to look over whatever they're going to sign to make sure that they're not going to get screwed over. Try their best to find some legal help. That way they can make the best of it, so they don't get too screwed over. But yeah, that's what I'm thinking on my first thoughts, hearing the story. So I'm down to get into the open and start hashing these details.
Read the article.
I read it earlier, but I forgot it because I was busy doing so much throughout the day.
Okay. All right. Well, let's I can jump into it.
So I think the important thing to state first and foremost is that the state is already a party to every contract in the United States because they enforce the contract and they choose whether or not a contract is enforceable, right? So if I have a contract, for example, that is like 700 pages and it's like it doesn't matter what the contract is for. And on page like 402, there's like this line of legalese. It's really difficult to understand that gives me the right to take your kidney away. Right. And then I take your kidney. I kidnap you and I take your kidney. And I go, oh, you signed the contract, right? The state looks at this and goes, that's an unconscionable contract because even the lawyers looking at this contract like might have missed this part of the contract. It doesn't apply to the basis of what's going on. Like there's bargaining here and there's enrichment from the other party at your expense that doesn't like fit the contract at all. So they void the contract. So what does that mean when the state that is the enforcer of the contract voids the contract? What that means is when I kidnapped you and took your kidney, now I can be charged with kidnapping, and now I can be charged with like the damages of the surgery and the theft of the kidney, right? And so you're due damages for that. So when we talk about like, should we have consumer protections and things like that, part that is already baked into like the common law perspective that the state is a third party to the contract that chooses whether or not to enforce the contract, because once they're no longer enforcing the contract, they're enforcing other laws that you may have broken that would have been excused by the contract, especially if we're talking about illegality, which even some of these contracts seem to touch on.
Scott, it's like I don't understand why you think that we don't understand that, right? Like the people who may disagree with you here, because of course we do. Yeah, we understand how this works in contract law. That you can get these. Okay, whatever. Anyway,
it's not my assumption that you like understand the common defenses of contract law.
Okay,
maybe you do.
Nice. Okay. Right. That's cute. Any which way, yeah, we get that. You can take these
if all of you understand it, awesome. Then this is just for the audience's sake, right?
Okay.
I'm not going to assume the entire audience understands undue influence, duress, illegality, and unconscionability.
But then that's it.
Clauses.
But then that takes me to my point, is that other people don't understand. Not everyone understands their rights, especially when we're talking about children,
right.
especially when we're talking about people in desperate situations. And so,
which is what makes it an unconscionable
I
contract.
get that. Oh, thank you, Scott. I get that part. I'm saying is that people don't know how to necessarily exercise their rights, right? One, have the wherewithal to know to exercise their rights, and then two, have the resources to do that. So if you have people who are of low resource, and like can't afford, right, an extremely expensive lawyer like Lactoid, right, only for the elite, and you have and people who don't like understand, like oh, I'm being taken advantage of. It's like I thought this was a fair contract. He seemed like a fair individual, right? He's like, when my interactions with him seem the person they're dealing with or seem pleasant. I guess this must be the way things are, right? That's why you don't want people to get into these contracts to begin with, because people are inevitably going to fall through the cracks if we simply rely on the courts.
Yeah. So to your point, Prime, that's why I sort of brought up the situation of esports, because like if you follow, or I don't really follow it anymore, but if you followed it, whatever, 5-10 years ago, like that was like more of the occurrence of like you had very young people that were whatever desperate to get into the scene and become a professional, esport athletes, and they were just like signing things that like well, this is a contract, and it's just under the assumption that like it's a contract, so it's anything that you sign, like it has to like be enforced. And it's like pretty much I think you are spot on in terms of like this type of demographic aren't familiar with contract law, and like I don't know that Scott's assumption holds true.
Yeah,
So real
except
quick,
that's literally what unconscionability is, right? Like the
Okay.
problem is that you want to, you're talking about regulations that are like blanket regulations to step into these gray areas of contracts, because obviously not everyone's being fucked over by these contracts, right? Like some people are in, like, or we wouldn't be celebrating that many people are getting paid for stuff that they were previously unable to get paid for, right? So the problem is, how do we deal with these gray areas where people are exploiting people? And so like you can't put vagaries like exploitation into law as a terms of like regulation, except for what already exists, which is unconscionability. That's a part of US law, right? Like that's uniform contract code, right, from 1954. That's state statute 2-302, right? Like that's already law. It's just like what is your prescription then, other than to use the courts in these specific examples and to make and get rid of the financial incentive to exploit these people?
Well, so I'm a dumb Canadian. I'll admit that. So and so I'm less familiar
Yeah,
with
that's why I cited it so you could Google it, right? Like it wasn't me like trying to flex. Like I just Googled
no, I
it
know.
so I can have it memorized.
But if you want to repeat it, or like if you're able to like maybe like summarize into like what because to me at least intuitively, unconscionable doesn't scream anything obvious to me. Per
Right.
se.
That it's actually intended that way. There's a lot of other precedent that builds like what is and isn't unconscionable, right? So like in order for something to be unconscionable, like there has to be like an inability to bargain, right? So like if you have a lawyer present and your lawyer is like bargaining out your contract, then that's not like a unconscionable contract, because you had like valid representation and you were able to bargain for the most part, right? Whereas adhesion contracts, like very often you can't bargain in that scenario. Lactoid, please fucking step in. You're the goddamn lawyer here, and I'm explaining.
He was trying to talk, but then you like jumped over him. Amazing.
I was actually gonna
No,
ask
it's fine.
Lactoid. I'll be quick. So yeah, to Lactoid. Like, so do you agree with like sort of Scott's? I think they said earlier, like, yeah, well, any sort of like decent lawyer can like get these contracts essentially like null and void. Would you agree with that sort of assessment?
Kind of. So, unconscious. So there's 5 elements to a contract, and unconscionability is one of them. It's not necessarily unconscionable for a minor to sign a contract, but it's entirely one-sided in the idea that the minor can walk away. The minor is not held. The minor can void the contract at any time. The other party might not be able to if they're an adult or like a corporation run by adults, but the minor can. So yeah, I mean, if you're a minor, and this is something that I think would be important for people to learn, right? I mean, like, so one classic example would be, you sign a contract for like, some kind of, internet subscription, I guess, for like OnlyFans, or you shouldn't be on OnlyFans if you're under the age of 18 anyway. But like, some kind of fucking contract for like 2 years, and like you sign it at 15, and then a year in, you're like, fuck it, like I don't want this anymore. you're quote unquote locked in for 2 years. You just send a letter to the company saying, I'm a minor. The contract's off. We're done. And legally, courts will not enforce that contract of the minor. So the minor can get out of any contract they want, as long as you're a minor. Now, here's why I said kind of, because here's the fun part. As long as you're a minor, you can get out of any contract. But if you become an adult, you cannot necessarily get out of contracts that you signed when you were a minor, because the idea is, well, at the day you turned 18, you essentially signed it again, right? You essentially had taken on this new role, right? This is the idea of like student loans, right? You apply and you get the student loans beforehand. It's the government, so I don't even know if this is the case or not. But if it was like a bank or any other like private entity, you could cancel that contract up until the day you turn 18. But once you turn 18, I mean, now you could be in trouble, right? Now you could be on the hook for the next several years or the total amount of money. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
To be
thank you
fair,
for that.
I was talking about the limit cases that were presented in the article. I was like,
Sure.
you could win these. There's a reason they didn't go to court, right? Because like
right.
undue influence was obvious with that last
Right.
case.
Sure. Yeah. And you're right in that, like, so unconscionability, to just to put it straightforward, what it
It's
is
harder to prove.
Well, kind of. It really is just a judge who looks at it and says, this is really fucking unfair. And that's like the test, right? If you can get a judge that like look at that and be like, this is ridiculous. What kind of contract is this, right? If that happens, now you got a good argument for unconscionability, right? That's what you have to try to do. That's pretty much it. But yeah, if you're a company and you sign a contract with a minor, and the minor's like, I'm not doing the contract anymore, you would be a fool to try to spend any money on lawyers to pursue that minor. Because you would lose anywhere. You would just be done. Now, one issue is, what if your parents sign on behalf of you, right? That's another question. Well, that's split, right? There's some jurisdictions that say that a parent's signature can hold a minor, but most of them say no. Most of them say even if a parent signs on behalf of a minor, doesn't mean that the minor is necessarily held by it, but what it could do is hold the parents, right? So you can include clauses in contracts like, if this kid violates it, we're gonna, you have to pay all our costs for the parents. That would be perfectly illegal if they did that.
Mm-hmm.
Really interesting. Thank you for that. Like, that's actually quite helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you asked for a prescription, right? Fuck. I had one and I just forgot. I'll remember it soon.
You were going to say ban football.
Ban football. Yeah, true. But no. What if you can't contact these kids directly, right? So like these athletes are attached to a school or maybe a league, right? And you're saying that like, well, we don't want random agents in quotes, right? Being able to go to these people directly. So you have to come through the school or the league, right? Contact them saying, hey, I'm looking to reach out to, like the school basically becomes like an agency in and of itself, right? And I want to, work with one of your student athletes, right? And the school helps them through the process, not necessarily denying it, but just making sure that, everything is on the up and up and going from there. Also, you could just have regulations on like because you're talking about unconscionability, so things that are out and out like ridiculous, but like the line between ridiculous and fair can be blurred. So you could have a regulation especially when we're talking about someone who's going to represent you, right? Like going forward, you could have a line saying that, well, you can't charge more than like 5% of this kid's earning, or 10%, something like that, right? Like you could have like regulations around these different categories of what's going to happen, so that those contracts, if they do have to go to court, right, then they are thrown out on grounds other than unconscionability for like a judge saying, well, this doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, but the problem is like, let's say one person wants to represent you for like 10%, right? And another person wants to represent you for 20%. But there's a regulation, right, that says you can't represent this individual for more than 10%. What this is going to do is this is going to artificially limit the opportunities that these student athletes can get. Because the real reason that this other guy wanted to represent you for 20% is because he represents clients in the NFL. he represents like a lot of like he has more opportunities to offer you, and because of that he's going to spend more money on marketing, he's going to spend more money in getting you in certain places. And so like an artificial limitation of like how much what percentages like gets into an issue where now you're limiting the freedom of both the individual that's representing you, but also the students and their parents to be like, this is a better deal even though they take a higher cut because it's more opportunity. And like this is why these gray area, like this is why central planning in this is just silly, and we need to let the courts handle it.
I disagree, but I want other people to jump in before I.
Okay, somebody jump
Other
in.
guys,
Why am I
I
wrong?
go. Come on, guys, like talk,
I mean,
please.
like,
Yeah,
Anyone?
sure,
Yeah?
I agree. I think it should. I mean, I think like this seems like a case by case basis thing. You could very like some of the contracts are probably very fair, and some of the contracts the minors probably don't want to get out of, even if they could, right? And some of them might be you look at and you're why the hell would you sign this? And if they're high school athletes, they can just walk away. And even if like the person who they signed the contract with like is now they're out money, they put all this work into it, they're screwed. It doesn't really matter, right? They're on the hook for that.
But again, do they know that? Right? Like, okay, see,
Let's
I did,
advertise it.
but yeah, I'd say I didn't know that until you told me. Right? Like, if I was in that contract, like I can tell you, if I was like 17 or 16 and I signed a contract, right, and then like, hey man, I don't know, this seems fair, right? Like, can we talk about this? And then some guy like threatens me, right, and tells me how he's going to repo my parents' like belongings and shit, right? I'm going to like do exactly what this man tells me. So like, I'm trying to keep people.
That's why you go to a lawyer and say, "Hey, look, I'm about to sign $1 million contract.
You don't
Look
have
over
a
this with
lawyer.
me, yeah, but you go to a lawyer and say, I'm about to sign $1 million contract. Like you're gonna get paid afterwards.
Unless you don't, and then like right, because
can I just right. Would all your problems be resolved if we just said, okay, new rule, you have to include a disclaimer before all these contracts saying if you are a minor, you can leave this contract at any time before you are 18 legally.
I would, sure. I mean, that would be no. That would be nice, except if they don't include it, if they hide it, they do all those other things, right? Then like we're back at square one, because as a minor, I'm not going to know about this regulation like in the first place. That's why we have it, right? Like I'm not sure what that problem necessarily solves in of itself if we're dealing with unscrupulous individuals,
Sure. I mean, look, especially when it comes to contracts with minors, I think transparency is important. I would be in favor of like, make it maybe a requirement saying, look, when you're going to give these minors contracts, you have to give them like a disclaimer about what their rights are.
I mean, and I think that's a good idea. I like that. But like,
I agree with that.
I feel like there's from a libertarian perspective, there's no meaningful reason for me to fight that in any way, shape, or form. I'd agree to that. It's like not really a growth of the state in any capacity. Like, fuck it, make people put a disclaimer.
Yeah.
But I didn't. That does seem a little bit strange when you described it, Lactoid, in terms of like, before 18 they can just walk away. Would like that's great. But then like if they've signed a contract pre 18 years old and then like they turn 18 now that seems a little off. I don't know if there's much.
I understand. Like I get like the so I get the logic behind it, because like you have these agreements and like when you turn 18, like they become official is the idea, right? It makes sense to me. But like I can also understand like intuitively. Like you have let's say you have all these like weird contracts, and then like, you forgot you signed them maybe, or like something along these lines. And then like you turn 18, like, oh shit, like, now they're coming after me. Like that seems, I understand why people could be uncomfortable about that. I don't know. I maybe some kind of grace period, or maybe like, like the day before you turn 18, like they have to tell you, hey, just so you know, like today's your last day to cancel this, something like that.
Or, I mean, if you signed that contract when you were younger, I mean, the judgment involved is the judgment at the time you signed it, not the judgment at the time that it's enforced, right? So the fact that you signed it when you were a minor, you should still be able to get out of it at any age.
If it's unconscionable, but okay, there's two elements here, right? So like it's generally minors can quote unquote generally sign contracts. They can just void them if they want to. But just because a minor signs a contract doesn't necessarily mean it's unconscionable. But if the terms are like ridiculous, and their argument is, look, I was a kid when I signed this, like this is ridiculous, like I wasn't of the right mind, a judge is going to be very sympathetic to that argument in terms of being unconscionable. than like if you're an adult. And that, I mean, and I'd be very surprised if on some of these cases a judge wouldn't rule, yeah, you know what, this is, you know,
Yeah, like
all things considered.
mental capacity plays like a big role
Yeah.
in both undue influence and unconscionable contracts, right? Like
Right.
the ability of the individual signing the contract to understand the contract at the time that they signed it is usually like I wouldn't say it's necessarily a principal element. It can be in undue influence cases. It's not always a principal element in unconscionable, but like it usually is. Like most of the time when you see like an unconscionable like case that like goes to like an appellate or like state Supreme Court or something like that, it's usually like an immigrant that like didn't quite understand the language, or like someone with like deficient mental capacity, or like a minor. It's usually like some kind of thing like that that says that like at the time my knowledge or my ability to be able to understand this contract was impaired in some way.
So Hollywood always presents this like in dramas about these sorts of things as sound mind and body. I don't know how legal a term that really is, but if you're not of sound mind, that is to say your brain, you know, hasn't matured enough to where you can understand the full implications of what you're signing. I mean, isn't that a determination that gets made no matter what age you are? If you've entered into the contract really young, like, are you considered to be of sound mind at 17 or at 14 or at whatever age?
21 even?
Potentially, but not necessarily, right? It's not automatic that it's unconscionable just because one party is you know, a minor, or because one party is like you know, has had some alcohol. It needs to reach like a threshold. Like, so you can be so drunk that you can't consent to a contract, but just with one beer is not going to get you there.
I mean, like every time you agree to a terms of service, like you're signing an adhesion contract, right? And like minors do this all the time, and this is not considered like an unconscionable contract just because they're a minor.
That is true.
But unconscionable is not quite the same as do you understand the contract? Or are you capable of understanding the contract, I should say, because no one understands TOS when they click it, right? Because nobody reads it. But you
that's your
have,
fault.
you at least have a mind that's capable of understanding it. But if you're 15 years old and you sign a contract,
well, so it's important to recognize that part of the reason that we are blasé about signing these contracts is these very protections in common law that exist to begin with, right? So like if none of these common law defenses like undue influence or duress or illegality or unconscionability, if none of these existed, we'd all be really fucking careful about contracts, right?
Yeah.
But the fact is that because the state is a party to our contract, when we see an adhesion contract like a terms of service, we assume that the contract is on the up and up or fairly reasonable. And we know, at least in the back of our mind, that if this contract is ridiculous, that like we're likely not going to have to agree to that. We're like that it's going to be voided, right? And so like even if you had like a free market system, you wouldn't sign a fucking contract unless you had like some form of insurance agency or something that like protected you from like bad contracts. Otherwise, you'd read every fucking line, and if it was complicated, you'd have a lawyer look over it.
Yeah.
So what about situations?
You should still have a lawyer look over contracts. I just want to make that clear.
So I'm going to contact you every time
maybe not your terms of service.
Yeah,
maybe not
trying to get
service,
paid.
but like you know, major life events, selling a house, marriage.
Now that we're required, right? We're like accept, like when you go to a new website, like click OK to accept the cookies. I'm going to send you that every time. Like, is this okay? Can I do this?
I'll review the cookies. I'll make sure that they're good. Yeah.
The billable hours for Lactoid goes through.
Yeah, right.
Because every Twitch streamer is DMing him TOS.
As much as I like Lactoid and Pisco, I'm about over lawyers. Like, you guys make the world overly complicated. Fuck you.
True. Yeah.
Well, I mean, why they write all of this shit, and if the more complicated they write it, so that only they understand it, the more their fucking billable hours go up as a whole. Like, it's in their best interest to write the shit complicated as fuck.
This thing that I wrote, only I can read it, so make sure you hire me to read it for you.
I'm very honest about this. The Bar Association is something of a cartel, and there is a strong argument against it. I don't think it should exist, even though it helps me.
It reminds me. Actually, I want to talk about that, but go ahead.
I'm not nearly as against the bar association as it is how many people that are actually legislators have a law background. Is it what 1/3 of anyone?
It might be more than that, actually.
Yeah,
I
like
think it's more than that. Most of them are constitutional law.
Which makes
Yeah.
sense, by the way, because if you're drafting laws, you should probably know how to read them.
right. But on the other side of that is that if you're going to have anyone who's going to rig up a system, it's going to be a fellow lawyer, right? Like that
Fair.
goes both ways.
So,
So-
what if we required, in order for something to be enforceable, one of the elements that we used to evaluate it would be how easily graspable it is by the general public. Would that would dramatically change the way law would be done, right? Contract law.
It's already sort of done, like with unconscionability, it's sort of done that way, because like if you
Yeah.
give somebody like an intentionally obfuscatious contract, so and certain contracts are highly regulated. Like one example is like insurance contracts, for example.
Mhm.
So if you can write an insurance contract to make it look like people have certain coverage when they don't, that's a huge no-no, right? If the contract just looks like you have certain coverage, like they will bring down the hammer on you and make that company pay. If it, to a common person, it looks like there's coverage.
It's so regulated that like underwriting is usually is a huge profession in insurance, right? Like individuals that write these contracts, like that's their whole fucking job, because if they fuck up, they can cost a company millions. Not just from being sued and like losing coverage and issues like that, but also government fines. Yeah. But yeah, like usually like another great example, and there's a lot of cases about this, is payday loans, right? Like when payday loans first kind of hit the market, they weren't that regulated, and they got hit with a lot of unconscionable cases. And I can't remember the name of the case right now, but there was a big case. I want to say it went to I want to say it was Utah appellate courts. But basically like it was an individual that like didn't speak English very well, and when the lawyers looked at it, like even the lawyers were confused by the contract, and like didn't realize that like the interest, that it seemed like the interest was a monthly interest, but it was actually a daily interest, and they did everything to make it seem like it was a monthly interest, while technically it was full of like quadruple negatives and like all of these things, so that like you didn't understand that you were getting like a 2% interest rate per day. And this person like went into massive debt over like a $500 loan. And they were like, yeah, this is an unconscionable contract because it's difficult to read. Like it presents itself in such a way that technically it's not fraud, but it basically is fraud because it's hiding to you and trying to lie to you and obfuscate what it is that you're actually signing.
I will not take your child. It's really fun. Terrible.
Crazy time, to be sure.
So I have a new question, which is this. Okay, so that's with regards to if you sign a contract and you want to get out of the contract. Okay, if you were a kid when you signed the contract, you can get out of it. Fair enough. But what about, when I think about this topic, I think about, anybody see Friday Night Lights? Classic TV show. It's a show about a Texas town, something I'm very familiar with because I live in Texas town myself, and grew up in football culture and all of that. And this is a town where they would win. This is a football team that would win state championship like every year, or be very competitive for it. One of the best football schools in the country, let alone the state. And it's based on a real life football team as well. And there's a character in that show. His name is Buddy Garrity. He was the guy who owned the local car dealership. And he wanted to use the athletes in his like local car commercials to help sell cars. And I can imagine a scenario in which a student like sort of enjoys the celebrities, like endorses a lot of products, and isn't necessarily being forced into a contract, but as a result of focusing so much on that, as well as all of the duties playing high school and everything else like this, is sort of seduced by these outside forces into neglecting his or her grades in
Academics,
school and things like
basically.
academics. And so, like, what do we do about that? Because we know that, again, age is a factor here. You're not necessarily making the best judgments at 15, 16, 17. So if somebody's life sort of goes downhill, let's say, because a lot of colleges that do have good football teams still won't take you if you don't have a certain level of academic performance. So if their career gets hurt, let's say they don't get into the school that they wanted to because their academics were hurt, even though they could have a great football career in college, as because of their level of skill. Like, what recourse would there be to that if somebody has like misled a student in that direction?
Yeah, so you're talking about. Well, go ahead, Corey. Please.
No, I was going to briefly, I think there's a larger conversation to be had, pretty much what you touched upon, Ika, in terms of it seems like this scenario has been largely brought on due to that Supreme Court ruling that basically sort of got rid of the exploitation of college athletes, and now it's sort of bleeding down. Now high school athletes can be paid, but I don't know if is this basically to Ika? Is this a direction we want to go in terms of now it's all just about money making and is college really about academics? And when there's it's mostly about sports, and now it's high school might be turning into that as well. Go ahead, Scott.
I want to flip the example kind of on its head here, right? Because one of the things we talk about is that these people are so ripe for exploitation because their families are impoverished. And yet we have an example from the article that was sent, if you watched the video, of a college wrestling athlete that decided to go to college for a 5th year to stay on the team to maintain his NIL contract, and was working with restaurants and things like that, using his name, image, and likeness to endorse these places for money to help his family not be impoverished. And the thing is that if we want to talk about failing grades, the stress of the financial situation of your family is also a factor as well. We're talking about second and third order consequences of because they did this, now they're doing less school time, and that could be attributed to this thing. Yeah, that's the parents' responsibility as guardians of minors to ensure that their child is maintaining their academics. And at the same time, just as easily as it could hinder their academics if they're not careful and the parents aren't doing a good job, not doing this could maintain the financial insecurity that also could hurt their grade.
We also restrict how much kids can work.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, with minors. Yeah,
who is the guardian if this high school student is now financially supporting their entire family? I don't know that the guardian label really applies. Oh, wow.
Yeah, I've dealt with that in other contexts. I've worked in a school that was very low SES, socioeconomic status was low, and it was also 70% Hispanic. And the reason that was important was because, especially the girls in the school, their families, if they come from traditional families, often would discourage their daughters from going to college and would want them to contribute to the family economically instead. And they saw college sort of as a distraction for that. So yeah, I mean, even outside of sports, that's something that teachers have to deal with on a pretty regular basis.
And that might be good for them. You know what I mean? It's not really our place to say that we have to funnel children into college either.
Well, no, it's not that they have to, right? It would be that we want to give these people a choice, right? That we want to make them not if they want to go to college, then
yeah,
sure,
of course.
Yeah, I mean, in my case, it was
the problem with that is
kids.
So much college prep occurs before you're an adult. That I think is maybe the issue there.
Yeah, in many cases, these were straight A students who had full rides to good colleges, who then had to convince their parents that they should be able to go, and they wanted to go, but their parents didn't want them to go. And often I would get roped into those conversations, and then to their credit, more often than not, the parents came around. But I'm just saying that they had to be persuaded. It is a problem just when you're talking about guardianship, and these are the people that are making the decisions in that case, often they're making relatively short-term decisions, and it makes sense that they're making those decisions in the short term because these are people who are living paycheck to paycheck, who don't really have the luxury of looking 10 years in advance to see where this might take them. It also causes them
In
to trust
Austrian
the
economics,
process.
that's called high time preference.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And so I absolutely, understand the perspective that they're coming from. I'm just saying that the problem that you're identifying here with this scenario is a problem that also exists in other contexts.
It reminds me of Hollywood, right? Well, so the from the other side of it, like looking at contracts where like it empowers the child, right? And it's like, well, who is the guardian at that point in time? Where like the child becomes the breadwinner for the family, and like it, man, that fucks up family dynamics a lot. So I mean, look, I wouldn't, like, to be clear, like I wouldn't deny anyone the opportunity to do so. Like if it's better that these people get out of poverty somehow than stay in poverty, right? It's a lot to take in. And I think people definitely need to be informed of these things. So like I think in terms of the original conversation, I don't think I would be asking for a whole lot of regulation, because I do want people to have as many opportunities as possible, right? I don't want to lock them out of it. I am just concerned that we have a lot of unscrupulous individuals who will take advantage of these kids. I mean, this happens to adults as well, right? We get that, right? But especially for kids, like I think they're going to see like this is a huge opportunity, and we got to have some sort of protection, some sort of buffer. Not necessarily that my idea might be the best idea, but just something to give these kids a better a fighting chance here.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
I would say maybe it's a good idea for colleges and universities that are not technically tied to these nil contracts, right? Because legally they can't be offering nil contracts to people to go specifically to their school, because like there's a whole host of other reasons there, issues there. But I mean they kind of are, right? And that's kind of, one of the good things about this is that it gets all of these shady deals out in the open, because this shit's has already been going on, right? Like this has already been occurring. It's just now it's legal, so we can actually regulate it via judicial systems and contracts and stuff. Whereas before, it was all shady people to begin with. This business was already shady. Um, but I think it would be a good idea for schools to offer some of their resources towards investigating these things. I think that would be a giant selling point to parents that have, star athlete students that have multiple offers from different universities, that like, hey, you know, these different universities I want my kid to go to are all competing and they all have good contracts, but University of Texas, they have a good track record of investigating these contracts to make sure that they're like not unscrupulous or shady or something like that. And I think that that is a way that a market should probably step in here. I don't know how effective it would be, but I do think it would likely net them more star athletes if they're more protective of their athletes.
So then you agree with what I was trying to. That was basically my idea previously, right? Then do you agree with that? That like the school acts as maybe sort of an agency, or like it's maybe the school district because they have more funds to do such a thing, right?
I wouldn't mandate it, but I would strongly suggest that schools do this, because I think it's a great opportunity for those schools to ensure that they get the cream of the crop. Because parents are gonna want their kids to go to that university because they'll have a track record of not fucking over their star athletes.
That's really important when you talk about client outreach. If people think they're being screwed, they're not going to want to join up, because word of mouth is really killer for these types of things, especially money talks, but people talk too. So you got to make sure that everything appears to be on the up and up. Yeah.
Yeah, and if they get better athletes because they have a better track record of taking care of their athletes, well, then they'll win more games, they'll have more marketing budget, they'll make more money, right? So it's in their financial interest to take care of their athletes and do some to create a small investigative board that looks into these things. I mean, universities live and die by their athletes financially in many ways, right? and the thing is that like one of the things that's important also is that like these student athletes that get these contracts, like they get massive help academically that nobody else gets.
Yep.
Like my grandmother, right? She's a sociologist for a public university for VCU, right? Like Richmond Spiders basketball team, right? And you know, her basketball boys, like when she started getting paid to tutor them, she made so much more money tutoring the basketball team to ensure that all of these students passed sociology classes, right? And got a sociology degree with good grades than she could ever have got as a tenured professor. Like she was making triple the money, like making sure that she gave direct like intervention and help and made sure that basketball students got good grades. Like you know what I mean? Like so
Yeah.
I think that we do have to recognize that
For a
opportunity as
sociology
well.
degree, if you,
They
if
dumb money into athletes. They really do.
My I was I got when I was in college, like it was near the end of my time there. It might have been my last semester, I don't remember. But like I realized I could get like a stats major if I just took one stats class, right? It was just that close to it. I'm like, all right, why not? Right? Not a major, excuse me, minor.
Minor.
But like yeah, so I was like, yeah, why don't I just do that, right? So I did, and I met a guy who was on the football team. I had no idea because I don't watch football, and you know, but he was right. And like this dude did not know shit. Like he didn't know anything, right? Like he was like, but I mean, like, and it sucks because I don't know what his background was, right? I don't know like what he had to deal with to get there, but it seems like schooling beforehand failed him, and he just was not college ready, and he was like a senior. He was like a senior or junior at that point, right? And it's like he was just being pushed through. So when that scandal happened, remember that on this note, remember that scandal happened a few years ago, where like we discovered like colleges were just like making up exams or making up scores for athletes. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, barely. I kind of remember. Yeah.
Yeah, there was like
either way, it doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, when that happened, I was like, oh, I get that because I remember that dude, right? He was a nice enough guy, but he didn't know shit. Like he would ask me for help. I'm like, okay, I'll try to help you, right? And I'm like, these are like, it's stat 101. It wasn't hard. I passed that from the A, right? Like, and it wasn't hard at all. And so I'm like talking to him like with like basic
you
math
just look
terminology.
at the chart. Like you just do the formula and then you look in the back of the textbook of the chart and go, this is the number. Like it's not hard.
Do you think somebody like that though? I mean, not to be mean, but it would almost seem to me that their best chance at like a lot of success would be playing football. And you know, if we're gonna say, you know, we're gonna put a whole bunch of effort and direct this person away from what they're good at to like flounder maybe in a field that they're not good at, we could be doing him a disservice, right? Because maybe instead of learning stats, he should be playing football because what's going to make him more money?
Yeah, but in terms of maybe like long-term career decisions or life decisions, like maybe getting a college degree or some college education is a good thing. Like I don't know if I don't know that highly specialized in only whatever sport.
I feel like he's saying something.
Prime was saying he couldn't like get through a stats class. Like it seems like for this kind of person, like maybe football is like his avenue to success.
Oh, no, I would say that's, I don't know this person, but there's totally a trend of not just athletes, but many students just being pushed through because, you know, many people just don't want to like fail, and understandably so. It's not an easy thing to fail a student. Like as someone who pretty much like exclusively TAs like pretty much like last year biochemistry courses, like the number of students that they're in their last year taking, you know, advanced biochemistry, like, and they don't know basic fundamentals that they should have learned in first year chemistry. It's like off the charts. And it's like, I almost have to like, I'm pretty much like giving like almost like a full, like, you know, brief primer education on like fundamental chemistry that they should have had like years ago, but they just never.
There is a weird trend. Well, there's a weird trend of like the average grade over the past so many years has been going up. Professors they're just grading higher, right? C's used to be the average, right? It's not the case anymore, right? Where it's like B, like moving like kind of up into A territories, like becoming the average grade, which I think is ridiculous, and it shows sort of a participation trophy culture that we got to work to rid ourselves of.
I wouldn't. Not my.
So
way.
I remember, it's ironic that you say that because these are people who, in one element of life, are definitely doing a lot more than just participating because they're high level athletes. But at the same time, they kind of do need a participation trophy on the academic side. And I remember having this discussion back when I was in college. I remember being at a party, and there were a lot of jocks that had crashed the party, and one of them was talking about how he sleeps through class, doesn't give a shit about class because he's the only reason he was here was because he was on an athletic scholarship and it was an opportunity for him to play, and he would never be able to play if it weren't for this athletic scholarship, and the academic side was totally like worthless for him. And I asked him, I said, well, do you feel like you're at the level to where you'll be able to go pro after this? And he said, well, no, I'm not there. I'm barely at the level where I need to be for this. I'm like, well, I said, then the whole like benefit to you of having this athletic scholarship is to get the degree and then have a career after that. Like that's what the athletic scholarship buys you. And in theory, that's what it is for almost all athletes, right? Very few are going to like move on to a professional career. But I remember he got so incensed at me saying that. I mean, I almost started to fight because it just had never occurred to him that when his 4 years of eligibility are over, he's going to need to rely on something else. And
He's got a plan for the future. How controversial! How dare you confront him with that, Aiko?
Well,
I mean, the whole benefit. We're told that the whole benefit of these athletic scholarships is that it allows a whole class of people who might not otherwise go to college to be able to leave with a degree and with serviceable skills and higher income after graduation. But for him, that absolutely wasn't the point of the scholarship. And it just hadn't occurred to him that he would have to do something after the 4 years was up.
Right there. I mean, part of me also thinks, though, at some point they're adults, right? If they're in college, if they want to make bad decisions, they should be able to. And I mean, they're athletic, right? They're ripped, they're jocks. I have a hard time feeling bad for them. I'm sure their life is probably okay, right?
He was definitely getting laid.
Yeah, they're going to the parties. They're getting the girls,
getting the ladies.
I'm
Holy
studying.
shit!
I'm at home studying, right? I suffered how many years, and now I get the degree, and
Yeah, I mean, like,
and I'm sorry.
His life is going to be so awful. His life is going to be so awful.
He had fun early.
Listen. When he gets his sports medicine degree and he goes to a gym to become a personal trainer, and he just finds 40-year-old hot women and just crushes puss, right? Like it's going to be so awful for him.
Good for him. Like you want to play first and work later. I mean, that's on you.
Lactoid. But you are acting like these are in like equal quantities. Oh, okay. So I just exchange this for time, right? And so now I'm playing afterwards. Like, are you getting? Are you partying the way they used to party? Are you having the amount of ladies like throw themselves at you the way that it used to be the case?
Someone in my chat.
Also, Fabian.
This is a chill panel. Someone in my chat just said, "LOL, athletic scholarships are high testosterone welfare."
By the way, I like how Fabian assumed that he was going to graduate with his sports medicine degree.
Yeah,
I think his argument was that he was not going to graduate because he didn't care about his grades. All he cared about was getting C's through the first 3 years and then like failing all of his classes senior year because eligibility wouldn't matter at that.
Yeah, I want to and just like emphasize.
Well, that guy's a complete idiot.
Well, this is one way. I mean, maybe this is controversial, but like we for those of us who've been to college and we have met these people, these jocks, right? Like we see the kind of life they live. How bad do we really feel?
I don't have resentment towards them, Lactoid.
I don't feel bad for them. Right? That's all I'm saying. Like,
coming this way, I don't know.
Like there was a lot of people I didn't like in high school, but damn, I sure don't talk about them now that I'm 30.
Yeah, and also, with students, when I deal with students, there's one thing that we teachers say to each other sometimes, and that is you're not necessarily like when you give them a lot more patience than you feel like they're due at that time so that they can have perform better later on. Like you're not doing it for the person that they are now, you're doing it for the person that they one day will become, because we're all kind of jerks at 15, and when we're 30, at least I like to think that we're better people at that point.
No,
and
I'm
so
a bigger jerk.
It's only making
I
me
just-
imagine Scott as a high schooler. I'm like, this would have been fucking
I was
insufferable.
never a jerk. I was never
Listen,
a
some
jerk.
of my worst students come back.
All right,
to
I'll be
me at
honest.
30 and 35, and say, "Hey, you may not know this, but this is the impact that you had on me." And they have way better lives and are way more productive than I ever would have thought they were at the time that I had them as students.
I was way worse. I was a
Amazing.
horrible high schooler.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I just think like at some level, like it kind of shows like the unfairness of welfare, right?
I just look.
Well,
I
can you
mean, like
expand on
to
that,
try
Lactoid?
and to try and
Yeah.
get this
does
back
that
to the
mean?
topic, right? I think my overall point here is that, you know, when you introduce regulations onto this instead of allowing the courts to do what is the court's purpose here, which is to find these contracts that shouldn't exist, that should be voided, and potentially pay damages to individuals that have been taken advantage of in these contracts. I think you limit what we all recognize are a lot of opportunities for these students. And we see a couple of tales. We see like the end of the distribution, right? In these articles of like some of the horror stories. But that's true of anything in life, right? Like anything that exists that you think is good, we can find a couple stories where it turned out horribly awry. And this is the place where the courts are supposed to step in and fix this. And there's a reason that that last case didn't go to court, because they know they would have gotten their asses handed to them in court. And that's why they settled out. And so I think I don't want to limit student athletes' opportunities just after getting this victory to where they can finally be able to reduce some of that stress and actually get paid, help their families, help propel their careers, because we're worried about the limit cases that should be taken care of in court. And we should set that precedent, and we should support them in setting that precedent, and we should call motherfuckers to sue these assholes that are using these, like, essentially engaging in fraud with these people.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not against athletes getting paid, or even like high school athletes, but I think again, there's that larger conversation of like, should a child be placed in the position like they're supporting their family, as Prime said, like that's a lot of pressure. I think that's a testament to the lack of support for families in these situations.
So we're all okay. We're all okay with child labor, right? To some extent.
Uh,
Is there anybody here that's like fundamentally opposed to child labor?
Well, what do you mean by
To some
Wait,
extent,
wait.
is fine.
I got in a shitload of trouble on Twitter for this. Define child labor for me, please.
yeah?
So
okay.
sure. So like I would define child labor as anybody under the age of 18 working like in employment, getting paid, paying your thefts, aka taxes, and these kind of things. Like I would consider this to be like employment.
Okay, the reason I asked this is because when I think of what you just said, I'm like, yeah, like, someone who's 15, 16, 17, getting their first job, working to pay, for their first car or what have you. I think that's incredibly based. But whenever I mention that on Twitter, apparently I want 9-year-olds in coal mines. So, like, it's one of those deals where, like, yeah, apparently I'm pro-child labor. I fucking hate.
Yeah,
Not
I would
coal
say-
mines.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
no,
the
like, that's
the
the
problem
joke.
is
Just mines.
the problem is
No,
No,
with
you gotta
so
put them
many
in the salt mines because every time they cut themselves, then they really hate themselves.
the problem
Jesus
is with
Christ.
the problem is with so many things, academics like to redefine words. So child labor from an academic perspective, and the way that like studies and the UN does it, specifically cites like exploitation, slave labor, fraud, or like unlivable working conditions, etc. And so, but however, they'll redefine it the way that you're doing it when they want their charts to make it seem like child labor is really bad and they need funding. They'll include all labor that children do, like at 15 and below, right? And then when they're talking about like why we're against child labor, it'll be that narrow vision. And so like it actually is really important that you define what you mean by child labor, because academics have muddied the waters and made conversation difficult around that topic, because most academics that are just circle jerking useless ass fucking talking points against each other and not actually doing any good in the world.
True.
Well, yeah, to Lactoid. So, can you maybe clarify your position on child labor? Like, do you have like a spectrum, or is it like
Yeah.
anything goes?
Yeah, no
Trying to
spectrum.
goes a child labor.
No, so here's my principle, right? So like, I don't think children can consent to like certain risks, right? There's certain activities that are inherently risky. So coal mining would be one of them. I don't think children can consent to coal mining. So that would be one of the jobs that's off the list, right? But there's a lot of jobs that I think are perfectly like age suitable. You know, if you're 15 or 16 or 17, you're working in a fast food joint. You're, maybe even like some janitorial staff in some way. I think that's totally fine. And
A
you
sex
could go,
hotline?
no, not quite. You could even go younger, I think, right? So like, I used to go to this Chinese food restaurant, and there's an exception for like normally go to be 15, but there's an exception if you're a family member, right? It's a family-owned restaurant. So this little 9-year-old girl, or 9 or 10 or 8 or something, she would do her schoolwork, and then when a customer would come in, she would come and take their order. And I felt a little bit weird giving my order, like leaning over the counter and giving my order to like an 8 or 9-year-old. It did feel odd, I'll admit, but it was perfectly fine. And the kid seemed fine. There wasn't any evidence there, I think, of wrongdoing. So I think I think it's totally fine to have maybe even as low as 9 or 8. Cashiers.
So to link these two things,
Just on that, and I'll jump to you, Scott. I'm used to that. I have like corner stores, like around here, and like most of them are the ones I'm talking about are Asian run, and their families. I like literally saw their kids growing up. Right, like, and I used to give them their orders when they were like 9. The little girl was 9, right? And now I think she's in college. I don't live there anymore, but like she's in like college. But I've gone back and I've seen her afterwards. But yeah, I've just seen these kids grow up. But it just makes sense within the context of a family, right? To help them out. And that's kind of how we've done it for all of time.
And build the business, right?
So,
and that kid's gonna get that business later on down the road.
Yeah.
So linking these two things of like these athletes, right? I think what's a really interesting thing is that child labor laws don't help anybody. They're really, really fucking bad. And so one of a really good case study in this is in 87, I believe. There was a congressman and a big movement to boycott the ready-made garment industry in Bangladesh because of all the child labor that was being used, right? And so what the UN and Paul Krugman did is they followed up, right? Like Nobel-winning lefty economist, right? Like
not a lefty. He's not a lefty. Come on, please.
He won a fucking Nobel Prize for trying to prove that minimum wage increases are based.
That's not left. That's not just he's on the left. He's not a leftist or anything like that, right? He's
okay. Yeah. He's a neoliberal, nevertheless, right? Like he's not a fucking Republican economist, right?
Fair enough.
Nevertheless, right? What they did is they found that in Bangladesh, what they did is many of the factories fired all of their child labor so that they could avoid these boycotts and U.S. laws that they thought were going to pass. So they fired roughly 50,000 child laborers. And what they discovered is that for nearly all of these child laborers, they ended up in more dangerous professions, disappeared, or ended up in sex trafficking. Because that's the reality of child labor, is that overwhelmingly throughout the world, the reason that child labor exists is because of the economic conditions and the education environment. There's only one exception that is an outlier, and that's China. And when you parse the data out, you'll realize that that's just because of massive wealth disparity between places like Shanghai and Beijing and like mainland China. That like it still applies even in China, that once you get over about $12,000 a year, child labor essentially disappears, regardless of the laws. And the laws didn't work in the US. They didn't affect high school rates. They didn't affect child labor rates, any of those things. Like whether or not they existed had almost no statistically significant effect. And so I think it's really interesting when we compare that today to these name, image, likeness contracts of individuals that we're talking about being exploited. And you look at it and you go, well, these people should just wait until college. These are children that like shouldn't be getting these jobs for money. But like it's almost like an elitist kind of like silver spoon in our mouth position that we don't recognize like the struggles that individuals from low socioeconomic status communities have, and like the lure of being able to make a lot of money, and we want to make sure that they're protected, but also we want to give them these opportunities because these are the very things that pull their family out of poverty.
I don't think anyone disagrees with that, though, right? I think everyone is on board with them having those contracts. Just like the details of how they get into those contracts and like maybe what those contracts might. Yeah, I think everyone agrees with you there. But I think it's super interesting. Just put it out there. I think it's what you talked about Bangladesh. I hadn't heard that. I find it quite believable. If you have any material on that, like articles or something.
Yeah, let me write it
There's
down.
more
or
to
I'll
unpack
forget. I
there.
want to say it's 97 is when they did the study, the follow up.
Yeah. See, that's why I only buy my clothes from child laborers. Give them work.
Exactly. Exactly.
So Lactoid, to understand your position better on child labor and based off of past conversations, panels, I think I know your answer, but just want to kind of like make sure. So do you think, let's say for example, is a 12-year-old like allowed to be like a server at like a strip club?
Not at a strip. No, that wouldn't be like an appropriate environment for a 12-year-old.
So like, what's your rationale?
Around like highly sexualized activity, which is probably not conducive for their well-being and future development, in the same way of a non-sexualized establishment, where I think it's a lot more conducive to their well-being and future development.
Like coal mines.
Yeah, exactly. What about coal mines then?
No, coal mines are. So look.
No, Lactoid said earlier that he's not for.
That was his
coal mines.
guiding principle.
Yeah. But like, strip clubs, I think, are like comparable to coal mines here. Look, I have a lot of family that died because of coal mining. Like that's where my family comes from. There were a bunch of uneducated coal miners. We have their death records, right? Black lung, kicked by mule and killed. Black lung. Like it's just down the line. It's Appalachian dirt poor coal miners. It's a horrible, like dangerous job. And no, kids should not like be doing that.
Let me give you the actual libertarian foundation for that. If you, as a parent or guardian, create permanent physical or psychological harm or intend to put them in that place, then this is a forestallment of your guardianship. You lose the rights towards the guardianship of the child, which means that anyone that is capable of being able to take over that position as a guardian can vie to do so. But if you are in a country like, let's say, Bangladesh, and no one is capable or around to be able to give you those opportunities, then you're still remain under the default guardian. And that's unfortunate. But if no one is there to adopt said child into a better circumstance, then no one is there to do so. That would be the grounding from a libertarian perspective.
And I can agree with that to some extent, but I would still not allow kids to work in coal mines pretty broadly. But for other jobs, yes, I think there's plenty of jobs kids can do. Strip clubs, coal mines, sex work, no. The fucking wait, like
what about
running a cashier? I mean, come on, that's totally.
Okay, no, I was going to ask about that. What if you're a cashier at a legal drug dispensary, right?
At a drug dispensary. You know what? I'm actually. I don't know.
You dare say it.
I don't know. I think that there, if you can draw like because there's studies on the sexualization that proves that it's bad. I always find it ridiculous. So whenever I go to the grocery line, the cashier who's 18 or 19 has to go get somebody who's 21 to come sell me my whiskey. Like, are you kidding me? Like, you saw it on the conveyor belt. You know I'm buying it, and like you have to go get somebody else just to scan it. That's a ridiculous law. That doesn't help anything. It's just stupid. It's time consuming. If you have like a 14-year-old who like sells somebody their bottle of heartworm medication or whatever, is that really gonna like scar them? I can't. I mean, maybe for if we're talking like recreational drugs, maybe, but for like general pharmaceutical drugs, I don't see like a harm there. I mean, do you?
My dispensary will only hire children because I know that they won't get high on our supply.
I mean, they might, and then you got a big problem on your hands.
How do you know that?
Do you know that?
Yeah.
Well, that's what the whip is.
And with the business owners, got their plan.
I just think the anti-child labor meme is just like, like back in the day when kids were working, and it's like constantly like pushed down our throats. I don't know. I do think that like working and establishing a work ethic and making money, these are all great things to learn at a young age. And I'll tell you, like from my own experience, I learned way more actually doing than I did in a classroom. When it comes to my current job, when it comes to every job I've held before, I learned like being an attorney was nothing like law school. Like it's just not like doing is so much more important when it comes to all the actual life things. And I'm sorry, I know there's some educators on this panel, so I don't mean to insult you, but I genuinely
Please do. I will go on a full tirade and rant over how bad like education is now, because we study what King Henry and his wives, and then all of a sudden we actually have to go into the real world and pay taxes and fucking learn how to cook. None of which is really taught in schools anymore. Like me and Sprout are on this one.
If you took chemistry, you know how to cook.
No,
cook what?
You know how to make anthrax in your fucking garage.
It's still cooking.
Oh my god! Great, we're gonna turn our kids into Walter White. Let's go.
Yep.
It worked out just fine for him.
We're turning him into Jesse.
That should be legal, by the way. But
you've got to go to college to become
what?
Walter White.
Meth?
What should be?
Meth.
Yeah, meth should be legal. Yeah,
Meth should be legal, of course.
Why?
It's a crime. It's a crime that it's not.
It's a prescribed drug, technically.
I mean, that's true as well. But I'm saying, like, you know, you want to get like tweaked out and like clean your room. That's
What universe am I?
That's Jordan Peterson's advice. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think that's exactly his advice. You know.
Oh, that was a deep joke, actually.
You know, I think it's more like benzos and clean your room, but you know, whatever.
Not quite as energetic.
That's just, yeah.
Right.
That's,
I was gonna say
that's just a spectrum.
Hi, you wouldn't allow meth to be illegal?
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong. This is one of the highly addictive, like both mentally and physically destructive drugs out there.
Yeah.
Like, I know people who are on meth here who fucking don't have teeth anymore and shit.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I don't think that should be legal.
Well, I mean,
I'll put it this
crystal
way.
meth is like different than the prescribed meth.
Fair. Like, I mean, when it comes to controlled substances, I've definitely gone more to the right on this regard. Now, I'm not going to be like legal, throw them in the jail, but I do think we need to strongly push people into rehabilitative services to where it's like, all right, we recognize that we need to get you unhooked from your shit. Now, I know that's a pain in the ass, but I'd rather do that than just throw people in jail for 5, 10, 20 years, because that's clearly not fucking working.
Yeah,
No.
I agree with you. So I think there's some sort of like the best of both worlds of like I agree with Lactoid
No,
in terms of like
there isn't.
well, I'm not fully fleshed. I haven't finished fully fleshing out my point of like drugs should be whatever other all drugs decriminalized and no one should be in jail for consuming whatever it is. But that doesn't mean that you're advocating for them. As in, like I take this position, but I don't consume. I've never been charged.
Decriminalize is a useless, made-up term that is not logically consistent. There's no such thing as decriminalize. Decriminalize can only exist if it means legalized. When people say decriminalize, what they mean is maintaining a black market, arresting drug dealers, and taking other individuals that are the buyers of said good and then putting them in, like trying to get them help. What they're talking about when you say decriminalize is we want to maintain the war on drugs, but we want to put a pretty face on it.
No.
Like, decriminalize is not logically consistent.
No, I disagree with you here. We only have a few minutes left, but like maybe we can have.
And I said at the very least, I said more or less I'm in line with Lactoid of like legalization. So
no,
I'm not sure why you're like.
so I'm not necessarily in line
there's
with
no compromise
legalization.
here. There isn't a compromise.
So when it comes to decriminalization, right? Like for instance, when you talk about sex work, right? So when you talk to sex work advocates, a lot of them don't talk about legalization; they talk about decriminalization because
they're feminists. And they hate the Johns, but they love the sex workers.
No.
Like Julie Bendel.
Oh my God!
Like
please let me get words out of my mouth. Thank you. Great. There are people, and we've had them on this channel, who go for like the Nordic model, all right, of sex work, in which it's like the Johns get arrested, right? But that's not what I'm. Yeah, of course. People.
It's so cucked. It's
it's a terrible idea, right? No, I'm talking about sex workers who want full decriminalization, like for the buying and the selling, right? And the reason why they're making the distinction between legalization and decriminalization is because of legalization. There is the assumption that that regulations come. Actually, you should like this. That regulations come with that legalization, right? Like the idea of taxing it or like requiring like are you a quote unquote sex worker, right? Like do you have to get a license to become a sex worker? And like quote unquote safe sex work. And anyway, you put up all these barriers that make it difficult for people to get into that industry if they need it, right? So instead, decriminalize it, meaning the cops aren't going to come after you, right? And you have some protections, like if someone assaults you, you can go to the police, you can go to the courts and get some sort of remedy. But also, I don't know what the fuck just happened. But also, like you can jump in and out of the industry without any like sort of oversight.
So let me explain why that's a problem, right? Is because it also cripples the market's ability to be able to solve problems. So let's look at sex work, since that's like the new example, right? Because when you advocate for decriminalization over legalization, what that means is that there's still some illegality to it. There's still some fines and there's still some things, some regulation from the government that aren't allowed to occur. See, like if we had fully legalized sex work, one of the things you could do is you could be a madam, right? And you could have a house. And one of the things you could do is you could have a phone app, right? And every person that's ever worked with a John could rate the John and say, this person's problematic, right?
Like Uber.
And then
like
you
Uber.
could right, like Uber, right? And so when someone comes in, they're like, hey, I want to hire a prostitute. And then they're like, well, we require everybody be on this app in order to like come to this establishment. And then you scan your app and it's like, yeah, this guy gets rough with girls. He's really fucked up. Like he doesn't like he's a bad person. Don't work with this person. Right. And so what you actually do is you take away protections for sex workers because you maintain the illegality of the act, but you like make this weird compromise where the police aren't going to come, right? But you don't actually allow people to be able to innovate in such a way to protect people.
No, you can
Still
allow
maintain
that.
a black market.
I don't know why you couldn't do that. Like, maybe I have a misunderstanding of the law.
I mean,
so
if you
it could
couldn't
be a
do any of those
possibility.
things, then it's just then it's just legalization. Which
Okay,
is my
so
original point.
Okay, and maybe it's just we're arguing over terms. So I guess their point is they are anti-regulation, and so like you saw this like relating this to the drug market, you saw this like as soon as it's legalized, they have a whole list of regulations placed on it, barriers, right, that kept smaller drug dealers like out of it, right? You're not an official like a sanctioned drug dealer.
Yeah, Humboldt County is like the worst.
Yeah, right. So they're trying to basically avoid that situation, and that's where the idea of decriminalization is. Now we have a lawyer here, so we can talk to him. But I'd rather keep talking myself, right? Hear this on my own voice rather than hand it off to Lacto. But Lacto, maybe you can help us out with this, right? So is there some sort of a real difference between this idea of legalization and decriminalization, and the way at least I've described it previously? Would that make sense?
I mean, it sounds maybe what Scott's referring to is more of like a philosophical thing. I mean, I understand what you mean by decriminalization, right? We're going to keep it formally illegal, but we're essentially directing the police not to like enforce it on, you know, the people who we catch. So what this basically does is like illegal, but for businesses, and then not really illegal for individuals. That seems to be like what the actual effect is. So it's like kind of like
the problem.
It's kind of this middle ground. I mean, I would be in favor of full legalization on very like foundational principle bodily autonomy grounds. I think it's, you know, I think there's some really important like American principles that come with that. But I mean, if you wanted to decriminalize it, I think that'd be happier than if you wanted to keep it criminal. But I do think it's a weird like strategy to say, well, I want to avoid regulation, so let's just decriminalize it instead of legalizing it. Why couldn't we just be against the regulation and just say let's legalize it and deregulate?
Okay, well then maybe that is a better strategy. I see. I didn't understand that difference between like, well, not for businesses. You know, like that's interesting.
Right. That's what I mean with the app, right?
Okay.
Is that you make the individual not get arrested for it, but it's still a black market. And because it's a black market and it can't go legit, then like it it makes the market more constricted by the state.
Here's an example. So when, and this is less of the case now, but when Colorado was first legalizing marijuana, obviously marijuana is still federally illegal, right? And so all the banks would refuse to work with the growers, even though what they were doing was technically legal within their own state. Like there's businesses couldn't interact with the growers, which put them at a tremendous disadvantage. Those kind of and tremendous disadvantage, by the way, that wasn't shared by their illegal counterparts who were getting funding by the cartel, right? And so it always seems to backfire, right? It always seems to backfire and to like not produce good results when it comes to. I think the app idea is a great idea, and I think that's and also bouncers, being able to have bouncers in locations, having like a formal business location, right? I mean, let's be honest, strip clubs are. I mean, I've never been in one because I've got way better things to do with my time, but they are more secure than like some back alley. Right? I mean, let's be honest. Where would you be more comfortable working, in a strip club or in some back alley? Well, we didn't legalize it; we just decriminalized it. Well, that's all fine and dandy until you have to strip in a back alley with like weird-looking men all around you. Like that, I wouldn't be comfortable doing that.
I would also.
Long story short, decriminalization maintains the black market, which comes with a whole host of issues.
Okay, that's fair. Then thank you for educating me on that one. Lactoid, not. I
know, right? every time I say something, you're like, I already knew all of the defenses for contract law. Come on.
Okay,
I knew about. And then it's like, then he says something. You're like, thank you so much.
Oh no! Wait! No! Lactoid gave us a deeper understanding of contract law. I mean, like you gave me the most basic thing. All right, whatever.
I'm sorry. You were fully aware of Williams v. Walker.
No. You talk about unconscionability. Yeah, I get that, right? Like, yeah, you can have some things that are just unreasonable within a contract, and then because they're unreasonable, they can be thrown out, right? He's giving a deeper understanding of like child contracts.
You do you. Whatever. Okay. I already got the win in.
Okay.
I can talk about contracts all day. There's a whole bunch of really interesting cases.
I love talking about contract law.
That would take a long time.
Ty, quickly.
That would blow your mind.
I don't know. I don't know if you know this, but libertarians love talking about contract law.
Yeah, I can't imagine why. Like, so here's the thing. Like, I studied economics. Like, in theory, on paper, like what you guys are advocating for should work absolutely wonderful. The problem is, the moment you get off paper, it doesn't fucking work at all because people are fucking lazy. They want their services here. They want them now, and they don't even really give a shit to exercise diligence. Like, how many people actually look at what's on the back of the fucking printed thing for their milk carton, actually know what's in their goddamn milk, or their fucking potato chips, or anything?
Don't drink milk.
I read the box every time I buy anything. 100%.
Yeah, I do too.
Lactoid, you must waste so much time at the grocery store.
My roommate and
this is why he's not at strip clubs. This is why he's strip clubs. He's
like, where are the seed oils? All right, I see that fucking sunflower seed oil. Like, I'm not getting low T.
I can imagine Lactoid like
maltodextrose. That can't be good.
Glucose sucrose. This is just another fucking name for corn syrup. You lying asshole.
Look,
okay.
I love y'all, I really do, but like there's just levels where I like my ideals would put me in the libertarianism, but I can't do it. Like, I've seen what happens when people just have no rules and they just go, we have a society that says, hey, do what you want.
I would do it, but reasons. Cope.